Hello everyone and welcome back to Codekru once again. So in today's video, we are going to deep dive into a core feature of TestNG, and that is grouping. We will cover all these topics in our video. So this video might become a bit longer than the previous ones in our TestNG playlist, but stick around because by the end of this session, you will have a very clear and thorough understanding of how grouping works in TestNG. So let's start with the very first point in our article, and that is what are TestNG groups. So in TestNG, a group is a way to categorize the test methods, allowing us to organize and execute them selectively. So what does it mean? Let's say you have 4 test cases in one class where 2 of them belong to, let's say, a feature 1, and the remaining 2 belongs to feature 2. Similarly, in another test class you will have 2 test cases where one of them belongs to feature 1 and the last one belongs to feature 2. Similarly, in another test class you have 2 test cases which all belongs to, let's say, feature 2. So as we can see that feature 1 and feature 2 test cases are spread across classes, and let's say I want to run only feature 1 test cases or only feature 2 test cases, then how can I do so? I don't have a way to achieve this functionality as of now, and that is where grouping comes into the picture. I can assign a particular test case to a group and let's say name them feature 1 or feature 2 and then selectively run them, which brings us to our second point, and that is how to assign a test case to a particular group. So in TestNG, add test annotation provides a groups attribute where we can just mention the name of the groups that the test case belongs to. So here is the syntax of assigning a test case to a group. So groups attribute takes a list of groups. So a test case can belongs to a single group or multiple groups at the same time. So let's move back to our editor. So here we mentioned that these 2 test cases belongs to feature 1 and these 2 test cases belongs to feature 2. So we can just mention that test 1 belongs to a group named as feature 1. Similarly, this test 2 also belongs to feature 1. The test 3 belongs to feature 2 and test 4 also belongs to feature 2. And in another classes, test 5 let's say belongs to feature 1 and test 6 belongs to feature 2. And Codekru test 3 class, test 7 belongs to feature 2 and test 8 also belongs to feature 2. So this is how we have kind of assigned a test case to a group. Now what left is that we also want to run, let's say, only feature 1 or only feature 2 test cases, then how we can do so. So this brings us to our third point on how we can run selected groups in TestNG. So we can use a groups tag in the XML file to run a specific group, and this is the syntax of using the group in the XML file. So at the parent level we have the groups tag which will define all the grouping that we want to run, and then we have the run tag, and then we just mention the name of the group that we want to execute. So let's go back to the XML file. So in this XML file, we have just mentioned the name of the classes that we want to execute. So if I run this XML file right now, it will run all the test cases that are part of these 3 classes. But what I want is, I only want to run, let's say, feature 2 test cases, which kind of a part of feature 2 group, right? So let's just mention the same syntax, groups, then the run tag, and then I'll just mention the name of the group that I want to run, include. Name of the group is feature 2. So with this change, what is going to happen is, now my XML file will run all the test cases that belongs to feature 2 and also a part of these 3 classes. Okay, so let me just run the XML file, and here you can see that only test 3 and test 4 test case was executed from Codekru test 1 class, whereas we had 4 test cases but only 2 of them belong to the feature 2. Similarly, in Codekru test 2 class, only test 6 test case belong to feature 2, and hence only that test case was included in our execution. And for Codekru test 3 class, we had 2 test cases and both of them belong to the feature 2, and that's how they both got included in the execution. So let's say right now I only want to run the feature 2 test cases, but only from Codekru test 1 and Codekru test 2 class, then what I'm going to do is remove this test class from the execution and run this XML file once again. Here you can see Codekru test 3 class was not part of the execution, and hence the feature 2 test cases from that class was not included in the execution, and this is how the grouping works in TestNG. Let me bring the group back. Now you might ask that I also want to run another group along with feature 2. Then you can easily do so by using or by including one more include tag and mention the name of the group. So let's say I want to run both feature 1 and feature 2 test cases for my scenarios, and they should belong to all these three classes. So let me just run the XML file, and you can see all the 4 test cases were executed because all 4 of them belong to either feature 1 or feature 2. If I remove, let's say, any of the group from any of the test case, let's say remove this one and remove this one, and let's run the XML file once again. You see, test 1 and test 3 was not included in the execution. So this is how we can include one group or multiple groups in execution while running the XML file. Now one more point that I want to highlight here is the scope of grouping. So if you see that I have mentioned the groups tag inside this test tag. So the scope of grouping will only apply to this test tag and not outside of it. So if I mention one more test tag, let's say the name of the test is Codekru test 2, okay, and remove this test class from here and put it here, classes and the class. So right now what will happen is that the grouping will only apply to these two classes and not this one. So let's remove the feature 2 from here and only run the feature 1 test cases. So what should happen in this XML file right now is that this XML file will only run the feature 1 test cases for these two classes, and this test tag will run all the test cases from this class. So let's run the XML file. So as you can see that only test 2 and test 5 was executed in the test execution from these two test classes, because only these two test cases belong to the feature 1 group. But for the Codekru test 3 class, all of its test cases was executed because the scope of the grouping was only limited to this test tag and not this test tag. Okay. So this is how scope of grouping works in the TestNG, and please keep this point in mind while you are working with the groups. So with that said, let's move on to the next part of the video, which is how we can exclude a specific group from the execution. So let me just remove this part and add the Codekru test 3 class once again. And let's say I want to run only the feature 1, or I can say I want to exclude feature 2 from execution. Now let's run the XML file. Here we can see that only test 2 and test 5 was executed. So let's see why. So in Codekru test 3 class, both of its test cases belong to feature 2, whereas in XML file we specifically mentioned that we want to exclude feature 2 from execution, and that's why they were not part of execution. Let's go back to the Codekru test 2 class, and here you can see that test 6 belonged to the feature 2, that's why it was not part of the execution, and thus only test 5 was executed in that particular XML file execution. Now let's go to the Codekru test 1. Here we can see that test 4 is a part of feature 2. That's why it was not part of the execution as well, because we are excluding feature 2 from execution. But what about test 1 and test 3? Why they were not part of execution? This is because for exclusion of groups to work, a test case should belong to a certain group. But as of now, test 1 and test 3 does not belong to any group. That's why they were not part of execution as well. So always keep this important point in mind while you are working with exclusion of groups. Okay. So that left us with only a single test case, which is test 2, and as test 2 belongs to feature 1 and we are only excluding feature 2, so that's why it was part of execution as well and got executed. So we are done with the exclusion of groups. So let's see what other points we are remaining with. Okay, so we are done with these points and we are remaining with these ones. So let's see some Q&As on including and excluding groups. So the first question is, what if a single test case belongs to multiple groups? Will it still run if I exclude one of the groups? So let's try to do that. Let me add feature 1 back here, and now let's add another group, let's say feature 2. Okay, and let me add back feature 2 here. So this test 1 now belongs to two groups, feature 1 and feature 2. So will it still run if I exclude feature 2 from the execution? So let's try to do that. Here I am excluding feature 2. So let's see. So here you can see only test 2 was executed and test 1 was not executed because in a way test 1 belongs to both of the groups, feature 1 and feature 2. So if I exclude either of the groups, test 1 is not going to run. Okay, so that is the end goal of this question. So no, test 1 is not going to execute. So the next question is, if I only include group 1, will it still run? So let's try to do that. Okay, so for simplicity, let's just remove these and change exclude to include. So what all cases will still be executed? So as my test 1 belongs to both of the groups, feature 1 and feature 2, so test 1 is going to execute because I am including feature 2 in the execution, then test 3 and then test 4. So let's just see. You can see, right, test 1, test 3 and test 4 was included in the execution. Now the interesting question, what if I include feature 1 but exclude feature 2? What do you think is going to happen? Will test 1 be still be executed or not? So let's just see. Only test 2 was executed. Why? Because we are excluding feature 2 from the execution. So in a way we can say that exclusion has a higher priority over inclusion. So here we can see what all groups were part of feature 2, test 1, test 3 and test 4. As they were excluded from execution, so that's why we are not seeing it here. And only as test 2 belongs to feature 1 and also it does not belong to feature 2, that's why this was part of the execution. So these were some Q&As and these are some kind of edge cases that you should know about while working with groups. So let's move on to discuss the next point, which is groups of groups. So yeah, we can have groups of groups in TestNG, which is also known as meta groups. So how can you define a meta group, or we can say group of groups? So this is the syntax for that. So you can see within the groups tag, you will define a meta group, which will include or exclude certain groups, and then we will use the same old run tag to run the group. So let's try to do that. So this is fairly easy. So here you will use the define, and within the define you will mention the name of the group. So you will mention, let's say, feature, simple as that. And within feature you are including both of the feature 1 and feature 2. And within the run tag you will just mention the name of the meta group, which is feature. So let's just include other classes as well. Test 2, test 3, test 2, test 3. Oh, sorry, I forgot this tag. Cool. Now let's run the XML file. So you see, test 1, 2, 3, 4, all of the test cases were executed because they are part of either feature 1 or feature 2, right? So this is how you can also define groups of groups, or we can say meta groups in TestNG. Okay, so let's move on to the last second point for our video, which is using regex to run the groups. So how we can use the regex to run the groups? So let's remove the meta group from here and use feature 1 and feature 2 here. So right now, if we wanted to run both of the groups, feature 1, feature 2, we have to mention them individually using the include tag. But using regex, we can reduce it to a single include tag. Let me remove this one and use dot star here. So what will happen now? the TestNG will run all the groups that start with the feature keyword. So let me just run it again. You can see, right, all of the test cases were still executed because all of them were part of either feature 1 or feature 2. So this is how you can use a regex to actually run your test cases. So let's move on to the very last point for our video, which is grouping at class level. So till now we have only used grouping at method level and we have never used the grouping at class level. But you can also use the grouping functionality at class levels as shown in this example. Let's try to do that in our test case as well. So let's mention at the red test groups and let's mention the name of the group as class group. So now what will happen is this test 1 will now belong to 3 groups: class group, feature 1 and feature 2. Similarly, test 2 will now belong to 2 groups: class group and feature 1. So let me just run class group here, class group, and run the test case. So you see, only the test cases that were part of Codekru test 1 was executed because all of them were part of class group. So this is how we can use grouping at class level as well. And this is it for our video, and this is what we wanted to convey about grouping in TestNG. If you have found this video helpful, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe to Codekru for more content like this. Thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next video.